In this video, I'm going to be philosophizing on dynamical structuring mind faculties of the working mind as one engages dynamical structuring sentences and paragraphs of meaningful utterances of thought that reflect thinking and meaningful thinking only as it concerns analytic meaning. Analytic meaning transposing the meaning and meaning interpretations, direct and indirect associations to prior existing, well-defined and relevant vocabulary, engages the vocabulation of meaningful information that is easier to access the correct perception, correct action, and or correct behavior in association with the written and recorded terminological definitions, as is accurate and approximate to the most approximation of its meaning, that one can engage creative associations within mind-body connections, allowing for what you would otherwise find in a dictionary that has a shallow definition, in contrast to what you might also find with own original instantiations within a textbook, compiling on what is the most credible, highest quality, meaningful information in association with the highest organization of organizing sets of meaningful information into the correct categorical processes. One can self-conduct learning in association to the true meaning and meaning interpretations that are objective, functional, and meaningful, relevant to the depths of categorical meaningful information associated with the well-defined term to its terminological associations. One who is not learned in that specific domain, specific subject matter, or self-discipline, with prior existing well-established laws, dynamics, and philosophical explanations, original instantiations as a must-be good enough and necessarily necessary conditions to constitute the constitutions of meaning within that specific domain-specific self-discipline. A self-discipline of this nature, environmental psychology, different than cognitive psychology or the psychology of self. These are all different disciplines with different laws and dynamics, yet which are sub-disciplines of psychology. And psychology itself is a sub-discipline of the philosophy of psychology, each with its own manner of approach to psychology and the relationship between specific mind-body connections. Self is most meaningful to, and the philosophy of self is at its center, as psychology only concerns selves. It does not concern the subjectivity of a frog or of a beaver, only the self, as we're not doing animal psychology, which engages what are only behaviorist approaches to thinking about psychology and lacks cognitive psychology, as any psychology of the self is always going to consider the self as centrally meaningful, and with specific terms that are well-defined, that allow us easier access to specific laws, dynamics, and philosophical explanations, such as language ability. No other living organism can engage in dynamical structuring sentences and paragraphs of thought that is what well-defines meaningful information, the well-defined psychological process called language ability that is always encompassed within knowledge ability and knowledge abilities of the self in relation to the self. Allowance philosophizing to even develop and to create that textbook in the written recorded word that all theories are developed with specific manners of approach that constitute the internally valid, psychologically true, and meaningful criteria to its correct and appropriate criterion that, as a must be good enough and necessarily necessary conditions, satisfied to constitute meaningfulness within the philosophical theory and philosophizing to its best philosophical explanation, and not one that is vague, irrelevant, or meaningless, and which must always include the relevant, meaningful, objective, functional properties that are associated with the relevance and meaningfulness intrinsic to the more approximate configurations and sequencing of meaningful, effortful thinking that allowances easier access to knowledge that is most meaningfully effective and efficient at communicating various verbiage in relation to specific perception, action, and or behavior self conducts. And that's all I want to say for this video. Hope you have an awesome one. Keep developing this episode out.